as to the recently released DNA results of the Paracas people. There were certain segments of the DNA that didn't match anything known to be human.
You're seeing concrete, tangible, DNA testable proof that extraterrestrials walked on Earth right among us.
According to traditional history, the Americas lived in complete isolation until Columbus wandered in. But a desert burial site in Peru just blew that idea to dust.
We know it from Central and South America. When the Spanish conqueror arrived, for example, in today's Peru, they saw some of the young priest boys which had long heads.
While excavating the sands, researchers uncovered 300 skulls that defy everything we know about human anatomy.
Their foramen magnum, as you can see here, is at the back of the skull. So that is a genetic trait.
They're unnaturally large, shockingly heavy, and completely missing the bone seams found in every human newborn. And the shape, that's not even the strangest part. The lab has now released the DNA analysis, and it points to a genetic lineage that had no possible path to South America 3 millennia ago.
I think 18 samples they were given, no results were forthcoming. We're not sure if that's true, or whether the results were so bizarre that they decided to hide them.
This find doesn't just tweak the timeline, it rewrites the entire story of our species. A glitch in human evolution, the skulls that shouldn't exist. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a respected scientist starts questioning everything he thought he knew about humanity, imagine a scorching Peruvian desert stretching endlessly in every direction. The red earth so dry it cracks beneath every step, and a lone archaeologist completely unaware that he's moments away from uncovering a discovery that will challenge an entire chapter of human history. That archaeologist was Julio Cesar Tello, often called the father of Peruvian archaeology. He had already worked on legendary sites like Chavín de Huántar, so he wasn't exactly easy to shock. But in the late 1920s, when he turned his attention to the Paracas Peninsula, an unforgiving wasteland of salt, wind, and endless sun, he found something that made even him stop in his tracks. Buried beneath that brutal landscape was a world no one expected. Huari Cayan, a sprawling underground necropolis containing over 429 mummy bundles arranged with ritual precision. This wasn't a casual cemetery. This was an engineered city for the dead, carved below the desert floor, and the mummies themselves, works of art. They were wrapped in intricate cotton cloths embroidered with wool, textiles so vibrant and complex that modern experts still marvel at how a desert culture mastered such advanced dyeing techniques. Every burial pointed to high status, elaborate headdresses, grave offerings, and the unmistakable sense that these men, yes, all males, belonged to an elite class. The environment helped too. Paracas is one of the driest places on Earth. It doesn't just dehydrate you, it mummifies you. Nature did the job of a climate-controlled lab, perfectly preserving hair, skin, teeth, even internal organs. A macabre miracle. And when Tello began unwrapping the layers of textiles, expecting familiar Andean faces, he instead found skulls that looked wrong. Not just unusual, impossible. Massive skulls that stretched backward as if gravity had been pulled from a different direction. Some looked eerily similar to the elongated heads of science fiction aliens, and this was only the beginning of the mystery. Now, to be fair, elongated skulls are not unheard of. The Maya practiced head shaping. So did the Mangbetu in Africa, and the Huns in Eurasia. Cultures across time have wrapped infants' heads with cloth, boards, and bindings to create distinctive shapes, often tied to beauty, status, or religious symbolism. But the Paracas skulls weren't following the same rulebook. When researchers finally took a long look at the skulls in detail, they noticed something that instantly broke the rules. Typical cranial deformation creates heads that are long but still narrow, with the same internal volume and the same bone thickness humans are born with. Yet the Paracas skulls refused to follow any of those patterns. They weren't just stretched, they were wider, heavier, thicker, and completely outside the limits of what intentional shaping can produce. It was as if they belonged to an entirely different blueprint altogether. Here's where things get strange enough to make even veteran anthropologists stop mid-sip and rethink what they're looking at. You can bind a human skull and force it into a new shape, yes, but what you can't do is change the fundamentals. Skull binding doesn't increase bone volume, it doesn't thicken the bone, it doesn't make the skull heavier, It doesn't erase or rearrange internal sutures, and it definitely doesn't alter natural growth patterns. Expecting deformation to do all that would be like trying to inflate a balloon just by squeezing it harder. You can warp the form, but there's no way to create new material out of thin air. Yet several Paracas skulls show up to 25% more cranial volume than a typical human skull, and some weigh up to 60% more than normal human skulls. That's a lot heavier than an average human skull. No amount of cloth wrapping on a baby's head can do that. If anything, binding usually causes the opposite: thinner bone, weaker structure, and increased fragility due to restricted blood flow. But the Paracas skulls are thicker, denser, shockingly robust. They weren't crushed or reshaped, they were grown. And then comes the feature that makes every medical professional raise an eyebrow, then raise the other one too: the missing sagittal suture. A gentle tap at the top of a person's head, and you'll feel a faint ridge where the skull plates fuse during infancy. That seam is crucial for birth. It lets the skull flex as the baby passes through the birth canal. Every human has it. It's as standard as having a backbone. But in many of the Paracas skulls, that seam is completely gone. Not fused, not damaged, simply never existed. A single solid plate of bone. In modern humans, being born without a sagittal suture is extraordinarily rare and usually life-threatening. Yet here lay dozens of healthy adult males, elite figures of their society, built with a bone structure that breaks the rules for our species. So we're left with a question that no textbook comfortably answers. If these people weren't shaped into this form, were they born this way? And if they were born this way, what exactly were they? The strangest skulls on Earth. These skulls don't just look different, they're built differently, right down to the blueprint. Every new measurement, every new feature, every new curve of bone whispers the same unsettling message. Whatever these people were, they weren't playing by human design rules. And once you take this anatomical tour, you start to realize that calling them humans with weird head shapes is like calling a shark a mackerel with attitude. One of the strangest questions these skulls force scientists to ask is, how were these people even born? Some researchers have suggested that the Paracas may have experienced some kind of altered gestation, longer pregnancy, different fetal development rates, or maternal biology that doesn't match normal human parameters at all. It sounds wild, but the bones themselves are the ones making the accusation. Their features don't line up with standard human growth, and this leads us straight into one of the biggest anatomical anomalies of all: the foramen magnum, the least glamorous but most important hole in your body. It's the opening at the base of your skull where your spine plugs in, like a charging port for your nervous system. In humans, the foramen magnum sits near the center of the skull's base, so the head balances neatly on top of the spine. Basic ergonomics. But in some Paracas skulls, this opening isn't centered, it's shoved farther back, dramatically altering how the head sat on the neck. This is not something caused by head binding. You can squeeze a skull, twist it, or stretch it, but you cannot move the entry point of the spine. That location is genetic, locked in, non-negotiable. Yet here we are, with skulls whose spines would have entered at a sharper angle, requiring different musculature, different posture, and essentially a different species-level design. If you had seen one walking toward you 3,000 years ago, their gait, stance, and head carriage would have screamed, "You're not one of us, are you?" And that's before we even talk about the hair. Thanks to the Paracas Desert acting like nature's vacuum-sealed storage unit, much of the mummified hair survived. And this hair tells a story that does not belong in ancient Peru. Native American populations, genetically speaking, overwhelmingly have thick, straight, black hair. It's one of the most stable genetic signatures in the entire hemisphere. But the Paracas elites, their hair ranges from auburn to deep red to strawberry blonde. Some strands even show lighter sun-bleached hues that hint at natural pigments, not dye. Seeing this in coastal Peru is like seeing an igloo on the sunny streets of Lagos. You instinctively know something is off. Red hair is genetically linked to Northern Europe, the British Isles, and parts of the Middle East. It should not be sitting atop mummies from an Andean necropolis. That's the moment researchers began feeling the heat. The visual mismatch alone was shocking. But then, when coupled with the skull morphology, it created a picture of a population that wasn't just different, it was foreign to the entire continent. And the deeper scientists dug into the bone structure, the stranger the story became. The eye sockets weren't just different, they were noticeably larger and far shallower than normal. The cheekbones flared in ways that didn't match any known human variation. And then came the detail no one could explain away. Many of these skulls were missing the sagittal suture altogether, an anatomical feature that cannot be erased, altered, or reshaped by any method of cranial binding known to humanity. Skeptics kept insisting, head binding, head binding. as if saying it louder made it truer. But the skulls themselves sat in museum cases, quietly defying every one of those explanations by simply existing. And then came the real kicker. These weren't the skulls of peasants. These were elites, towering individuals, stronger, healthier, commanding status. They weren't victims of forced deformation. They were the ones people worshipped. And why were they worshipped? Maybe because they looked like the beings their own legends described, strangers from distant lands or even skyborn visitors, depending on which oral tradition you listen to. All the anatomical weirdness in the world means nothing without genetic proof. So researchers decided to settle the argument once and for all. They cracked open the bones. They extracted ancient DNA. And when the lab results finally came back, they didn't just challenge archaeology. They lit the fuse on a controversy that's still burning today. DNA evidence that should not exist in South America. This is where the mystery steps into a lab coat, sits under fluorescent lights, and dares science to explain it. The bones hinted, the hair teased. But the DNA? The DNA walked into the room with receipts. What follows is not speculation or legend. It's the moment trained geneticists stared at their screens and wondered if someone had swapped their samples with another project entirely. If you're going to challenge the entire migration story of the Americas, you can't do it with sloppy lab work. And the teams working on the Paracas samples knew this. They knew archaeologists were watching, historians were watching, skeptics were watching. Everyone online with a conspiracy theory was watching. So they did it by the book. Every paragraph of the book, every footnote, every unglamorous sterilization step. White hazmat suits, face shields, double-layered gloves, positive pressure clean rooms that felt like you were stepping into an alien quarantine film. No one breathed directly on anything. No one touched uncovered samples. No one cracked a bone open without 3 other people documenting it. They drilled deep into the densest parts of the skull, far from any surface that could be contaminated. They extracted hair roots still sealed inside ancient wrappings. They removed teeth that had never seen air since the day the person died. Every sample was sealed, cataloged, and shipped to multiple labs across the United States and Canada. The labs did blind testing, meaning the technicians had no idea where the samples came from. They weren't told ancient Peru. They weren't told controversial skulls. They were just handed numbers and asked to map the mitochondrial DNA, the maternal lineage that acts like a genetic breadcrumb trail through thousands of years. The expectation was simple: confirm these skulls belonged to indigenous South Americans. What the labs got instead made them think the samples had been mislabeled. No one in mainstream anthropology was expecting fireworks. The standard belief was locked in. The Americas were populated by people migrating from Asia across the Bering Land Bridge. Their DNA should match known Native American mitochondrial haplogroups, A, B, C, D, or X. The Paracas skulls, weird-looking or not, should fall right into that genetic family tree. End of story. Mystery solved. Case closed. This wasn't supposed to be groundbreaking research. It was supposed to be confirmation. But history has a habit of embarrassing people who get too confident. When the sequences loaded onto the screens, the room didn't go silent. It went confused. The mitochondrial DNA wasn't Native American. It wasn't Asian. It wasn't anything expected on the American continents at all. As researchers dug into the genetic data, the Paracas skulls began pointing, loudly and unmistakably, toward regions scattered across Eurasia, stretching from the Caucasus to the Black Sea, through Eastern Europe, and even into parts of the ancient Middle East. The real shock, however, came from one specific marker: haplogroup U2E, a lineage firmly rooted in European and Middle Eastern populations and entirely absent from pre-Columbian South America. The first lab was so convinced something had gone wrong that they assumed contamination, a mislabeled tube, anything but authenticity. So they ran the tests again, then ran them a 3rd time, then sent the samples to independent labs for confirmation. And every result came back with the same message, as if a Bronze Age population from the opposite side of the planet had somehow left its genetic fingerprints inside Andean mummies. According to everything written in the history books, this was impossible. Yet there it was, repeating itself in cold, clinical data. History says no one crossed the Atlantic before Columbus. The Paracas DNA essentially laughed at that and said, "Watch us." The implications of the genetic findings were enormous, rippling far beyond archaeology and into the very foundations of human history. If these results were accurate, they suggested that long before recorded history, someone, an organized group, not castaways, managed to cross entire oceans around 3,000 years ago. This wasn't the work of lost fishermen drifting on makeshift rafts. It hinted at purposeful migration, coordinated travel, and a people who knew exactly where they were going. Even more intriguing, the skulls belonged to individuals who clearly stood apart from the local population. Many were tall, with red or strawberry blonde hair, unusual bone structures, and genetic signatures that didn't match anything native to the Americas. These weren't outsiders blending quietly into society. They appeared to be an elite class, foreign-looking leaders who maintained power and identity in an isolated corner of ancient Peru. And then came the final twist. The DNA revealed patterns of extremely close kin reproduction within this elite group. Brother-sister unions, cousin marriages, repeated generations of tightly controlled pairing. Whatever lineage they carried, they were determined to protect it. They seemed intent on preserving the red hair, the elongated skull shape, the rare Eurasian markers, and possibly even specific blood traits like Rh negative. Signs of a lineage they considered precious, powerful, or sacred. Why go to such lengths? That question still hangs heavy in the air, and it only makes the mystery deeper. Rh negative blood is extremely rare globally, and almost non-existent among Native American groups. Yet several Paracas samples tested as A, B, or Rh negative. That alone is a historical grenade. The standard narrative insists ancient cultures rose independently with little or no contact. But Paracas DNA whispers about a world far more interconnected, maybe intentionally so, and that leads to speculation far older than academia. Were these red-headed strangers refugees from a collapsing old-world civilization? Explorers, missionaries, exiles, or something even stranger? Descendants of a culture wiped from maps, remembered only in myths? Some point to maritime experts like the Phoenicians, who were known to cross the Mediterranean, skirt the coast of Africa, and venture into the Atlantic. They used advanced ships and navigational knowledge long before Rome existed. If anyone could cross oceans, it was them. Others looked to linguistic clues in the Andes, loanwords and symbols suspiciously reminiscent of ancient Sumer or Babylon. Coincidence? Or the faint fingerprints of visitors who left more than bones behind? Either way, the DNA forced historians to reconsider whether ancient people were far more mobile and capable than we give them credit for. Because this wasn't just one odd skeleton. It was a pattern repeated across multiple individuals, from multiple tombs, in multiple labs. Something happened here, something big, something we weren't supposed to find. To understand the red-headed strangers, we have to journey far beyond recorded history, far beyond maps, and into the realms of forgotten civilizations. The people who outran the flood. They survived something the world barely remembers, and history refuses to acknowledge. DNA can tell us where their ancestors came from, but not who the Paracas truly were. To crack that part of the mystery, we have to leave the lab and wander into the realm of myth, where every culture, from nomads in deserts to sailors on coral islands, whispers the same haunting memory: a world that drowned, a civilization that fell, and a handful of survivors who refused to sink with it. If you ask ancient cultures what wiped out the old world, they all give the same answer: water, lots of it, arriving much too fast. The Bible calls it the flood of Noah. The Sumerian tablets say the gods sent a storm so massive that even the mountains disappeared. The Incan legends warn of a deluge unleashed by Viracocha, washing away a previous age of giants. Hindu texts describe Manu being warned that a world-ending flood was coming. Mayan codices, Polynesian chants, and Aboriginal Dreamtime stories echo the same event. An ancient civilization wiped clean, leaving only a few survivors to rebuild everything from scratch. These cultures didn't share oceans, languages, tools, or calendars, yet they all describe the same disaster, almost beat for beat, like billions of people trying to remember one terrible moment they collectively lived through. Either every culture on Earth decided to write the same apocalyptic fan fiction, or they were all remembering the same nightmarish reality. And if that memory is true, then the Paracas may be the last physical clue left from a world that drowned long before history officially began. Now imagine this. The Paracas were not traders drifting in from somewhere near Eurasia. They were fleeing something far more terrifying, an actual global event. The lost homeland theory suggests that thousands of years ago, the Earth was hit by a disaster so violent that entire continents vanished beneath rising oceans. Scientists today quietly admit that around 12,000 years ago, something big happened, possibly a comet impact triggering rapid melting of the ice caps. Sea levels didn't just rise, they surged. Coastlines redrew themselves overnight. Cities, if they existed, would have sunk before anyone could even shout, "Run." So what did the survivors do? They climbed. They sailed. They searched for places the water couldn't reach again. And that's exactly where we find strange, advanced, elongated skull populations. High plateaus, desert mountaintops, impossible coastal cliffs, the mountains of Peru, the Giza Plateau, the volcanic ridges of central Mexico. Small, defensible places where refugees could rebuild their knowledge and protect what little remained of their bloodline. If the Paracas were one of these groups, then their unusual DNA isn't accidental. It's the genetic fingerprint of a civilization that died in the flood and refused to let its last survivors scatter into oblivion. This brings us to the most controversial question of all. Where exactly did these people come from? Some point to Atlantis, not the cartoon version with mermaids, but Plato's description of a technologically advanced society swallowed by the sea in a single, catastrophic day. Others sided with Mu, a vast Pacific continent that native Polynesian traditions say broke apart and sank long before written history. And then there's the global puzzle. Wherever elongated skull populations appear, they seem to follow the same post-cataclysm migration path, straight to highland regions. Look at the pattern. After the supposed flood, strange skulls appear in Andean peaks, not coastal villages. Similar skulls turn up in Egypt, not the Nile Delta's floodplains. Others appear in Mexico's volcanic highlands, not lowland jungles. It's almost as if these groups collectively said, "Never again," and refused to live anywhere that could be drowned a second time. If Atlantis existed, if Mu existed, or if some other world we haven't even named existed, its refugees didn't spread randomly. They moved with purpose, they moved uphill, and they carried the last secrets of a fallen age with them. But the most disturbing clues aren't in myths, they're in stone, bone, and art. Take ancient Egypt. Look at the family of Akhenaten. Their skulls are elongated, their bodies strangely slender, their eyes tilted and large. Egyptologists shrug and say artistic style, as if ancient sculptors got bored for one dynasty and decided to distort everything. Then go to Malta. In the Hypogeum, an underground temple older than the pyramids, thousands of unusual elongated skulls were found, before many mysteriously disappeared from public museums. Cross the ocean again, and you find Mesoamerican cultures that practiced skull binding. But here's the kicker. Bound skulls look long, yes, but they don't grow the extra bone mass seen in natural elongated skulls like the Paracas. So who inspired whom? What were all these cultures trying so hard to imitate? Pyramids built across continents, sun-worshipping priest-kings with elongated heads, mummification in places that supposedly developed it independently, solar iconography that looks like copy-paste mythology. Either the whole ancient world was coincidentally obsessed over the same exact ideas, or they all inherited the same memory, from the same people. If the Paracas were truly survivors of a drowned world, Atlantis, Mu, or something even older, then their legacy shouldn't just be in their skulls, myths, or bones. It should be in their abilities, their engineering, their knowledge of the stars, their medical skills, their technology, threads, skulls, and secrets. Before we talk about skull surgeries and impossible knowledge, we need to talk about cloth. Yes, cloth. Because the Paracas didn't just weave fabric, they produced the greatest textiles ever created by human hands. And no, that's not hype. Modern conservators, textile scientists, and museum specialists all say the same thing. No civilization in the ancient world comes close. This is fabric that's 3,000 years old, yet the colors still glow like fresh paint. Not faded, not dulled, glow. And they didn't just use a handful of pigments, they engineered 190 distinct dyes, each created from plants, insects, minerals, or mixtures we still haven't fully decoded. Most ancient cultures barely used 5 or 6 colors. The Paracas were basically running a desert chemistry lab with the accuracy of modern industrial dye makers. But the miracle isn't just the colors, it's the precision. Some of their textiles are so fine they appear to have been woven under magnification, the kind of work you'd expect from a jeweler or a watchmaker, except no magnifying tools have ever been found. Not one. Either they lost them, hid them, or used a technique we still don't understand. Whatever the explanation, their textiles weren't just clothing, they were statements. We understand something you don't. And as we learn more, that message becomes louder. Now let's talk about the numbers that make fabric experts stop breathing for a second. A premium luxury sheet today, something you'd brag about, reaches around 300 threads per inch. Paracas cloth? 500 to 600 threads per inch. That's the kind of refinement you'd expect from high-tech machines, not from a desert civilization with wooden tools. The threads are so thin they're nearly invisible, and yet the weaving is flawless. No mistakes, no drifting patterns, no uneven tension. You simply can't do that with naked vision alone. And the patterns within this fabric? They're not simple motifs. They're intricate, coded-looking designs, mathematical spirals, layered geometry, mythic creatures, symbolic animals. Some researchers believe these patterns act like a woven archive, stories, history, cosmology, or maybe something closer to a coded language. The Paracas may not have written on paper, but they didn't need to. They wore their knowledge. Look long enough at Paracas textiles and you start noticing the weirdness. You see creatures with two species mashed together, part serpent, part bird, part something else entirely. You see beings in mid-transformation, spiraling shapes that match astronomical cycles, symbols that feel mathematical rather than decorative. Some figures look mythic, some look biological, some look, well, speculative. Were these fearsome guardians from their mythology? Were they symbolic representations of forces in the sky? Or were these memories, images of something their ancestors actually witnessed? There's a growing theory among some researchers that the textiles act like a multi-layered code, a mixture of cosmology, genealogy, and scientific knowledge hidden inside cloth. At minimum, the consistency suggests meaning. At maximum, it hints at a civilization using art as data storage long before writing systems could hold that much information. Textiles alone would put the Paracas in the ancient overachiever category. But then you run into their medical practices, and things shift from impressive to baffling. The Paracas weren't just familiar with trepanation, the act of cutting a hole in a person's skull. They were exceptionally good at it. In most ancient cultures, this procedure was basically a death sentence. Infection, blood loss, shock. It was risky even in the 19th century. But in Paracas, their survival rate was 60 to 70%, far higher than scalpels and bandages Civil War surgeons thousands of years later. And how were they doing this in the middle of a desert? They used obsidian blades, sharper than modern surgical steel. They used coca leaves and nicotine-rich plants as early anesthesia. They practiced antiseptic treatment using botanical antibiotics long before the concept of germs existed anywhere else. And their cuts? Clean, straight, almost laser-like. But then it gets weird. Many trepanations appear on elongated skulls, the elite class. The openings aren't where you'd expect battle injuries, and several skulls show evidence of gold or silver plates being inserted to replace removed bone. They were implanting metal into human skulls, 1,000 years before Christ. Who exactly were they fixing? What exactly were they trying to access? Some believe they were treating head trauma. Some say they were experimenting with consciousness, targeting the pineal gland. Others think they were performing ritual surgeries tied to social or spiritual status. And a few theorists, those walking along the edge of academic patience, suggest that the Paracas inherited this knowledge from an older, possibly lost civilization. One with advanced biology, astronomy, agriculture, and medicine. It's the kind of origin story whispered in legends of Atlantis and echoed in flood survivor myths around the world. Even mainstream archaeologists, normally cautious about anything that sounds dramatic, admit something truly odd about the Paracas. They appear in the archaeological record suddenly, almost like a civilization that stepped onto the stage fully formed. There's no gradual learning curve, no primitive trial and error period, no humble beginnings. One moment, the desert is empty. The next, a sophisticated culture arrives with elongated skulls, advanced cranial surgery, complex irrigation networks, an unexpected command of astronomy, and textiles so refined they feel like they were imported from the future. You don't develop all of that overnight, you bring it with you, and scattered across their territory, the landscape itself seems to whisper that same story. On the Pacific coastline stands the massive geoglyph known as the candelabro, a towering trident-shaped symbol carved into the mountainside. Though its style echoes the Nazca lines, it predates many of them, stretching nearly 600 feet tall and visible from miles out at sea. Sailors navigating the coast have spotted it for centuries, and modern boat tours still drift close enough to see its immense outline etched into the red sand. What makes it even more remarkable is its endurance. For more than 2,000 years, despite relentless ocean winds, shifting sands, and the constant erosion of the Pacific air, the figure has remained crisp, sharp, and almost untouched, as though the makers understood something about the land, the climate, or the engineering of symbols meant to outlast time itself. With everything the Paracas accomplished, you'd think they would be one of the most studied civilizations on the planet. Instead, they're barely mentioned outside of specialized archaeology circles. Why? The answer takes us straight into the most debated and explosive chapter of their entire mystery: the paradigm shift. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Mainstream archaeology is not always about discovery, it's about stability. Timelines, migration theories, And the official story are the blocks holding the Tower of Human History together. Pull one out, say, the block claiming nobody crossed oceans before Columbus, and suddenly the whole structure wobbles. Careers, reputations, grants, and funding are tied to these narratives. Professors build decades of work on them. Admitting a 3,000-year-old European-linked DNA lineage in Peru? That's not just inconvenient, it's career suicide. The Paracas discovery threatens to rewrite everything, so it's easier for institutions to look away than to face the seismic implications. And it's not just DNA. There's a long, unsettling history of anomalous discoveries disappearing from public view. Newspapers from the 1800s and early 1900s reported skeletons in the United States that were 8 feet tall, with double rows of teeth. Museums cataloged them. Some were displayed, others vanished. Rumors persist that institutions like the Smithsonian quietly swept them into storage, or worse, destroyed records, to keep the official narrative clean. These gaps are a pattern. Evidence that doesn't fit the accepted story tends to disappear, quietly erased while textbooks march on unchanged. Paracas is different. Remote, arid, and difficult to access, it was outside the sphere of mainstream control. A Peruvian archaeologist, not a Western institution, uncovered the mummies and preserved them. The desert worked as a protective vault. It was here that elongated skulls, impossible DNA markers, and evidence of advanced surgery survived intact. Paracas became the rare exception, a glimpse of a civilization that challenges our understanding without being immediately buried by bureaucracy. Even today, the discovery faces resistance. Mainstream media dismisses the findings. Researchers are labeled pseudoscience enthusiasts. Personal credibility attacked rather than the data scrutinized. Skeptics call it fantasy. Yet the bones themselves don't lie. Dense, elongated skulls, rare European and Middle Eastern genetic markers, and trepanned craniums with healed edges all point to something extraordinary. It isn't just a local anomaly. It's a challenge to the global story of human history, and many aren't ready to face it. If we dare to accept the Paracas data, the implications are staggering. Migration timelines would need a rewrite. Humans may have crossed oceans thousands of years earlier than textbooks claim. Unknown genetic branches, or even undiscovered human species, enter the equation. Stories long dismissed as myths, giants, white gods, lost continents, may have roots in reality. Ancient advanced civilizations, thought to be purely speculative, suddenly become plausible. The neat narrative of linear progress is no longer neat. It's messy, vast, and far more intriguing. The truth is, we may only be scratching the surface. Peru's deserts, with their elongated skulls and enigmatic textiles, might hold the last tangible whispers of a forgotten world. Because if the Paracas mummies are telling us the truth, then the desert isn't empty. It's a library buried in sand, waiting for those willing to dig deeper. And the question lingers, what else is buried, still waiting for us to uncover it? Please click the cards on the screen now for more interesting videos.